welcome to the energy poverty first module concerning the political setting behind the energy poverty issue. My name is Eero Ailio. I'm an advisor for energy transition and local governance at the European Commission, DG Energy. So it's going to be my pleasure now to take you through some of the history. First of all, here we are talking about the Jurassic Park times of energy poverty. It's actually only a few years ago we talk about the so-called third energy package, and this is around the year 2009. Electricity legislation, which at that moment already had references to energy poverty and vulnerable consumers. But the awareness on the topic was nowhere there actually as it is today. So we had at that time, we were running working groups and discussions with experts, with various stakeholders on energy poverty issues, and finding out, looking into the reasons of this problem, how to alleviate them, and particularly how to get political backing to this problem so that we could actually get somewhere. And at that time we made lots of studies that you see also on the slide, ranking the different problems, ranking also the situation of the member states from green to red, and in terms of how much energy poverty is a problem in their country. And it tended to be less so in the northern part of Europe, and more so on the eastern part and southern part. Now, that work in the different groups like Vulnerable Consumer Working Group led to conclusions on the definition needs of this issue. So we tried to define what is energy poverty, we tried to define what are vulnerable consumers, and it turned out to be extremely difficult. And at the same time, we were looking at how to measure this problem. We are going through different sets of indicators to get an understanding of the problem, because obviously the issue here is that if you don't define a problem, it's difficult to measure it, and it's even more difficult to set any targets on it and address the problem. So we were dealing with all these topics, including the monitoring aspects, and knowing that at the end we have to define policies on this. Then at that moment, in comes the Energy Union, a key strategy of the European Commission. And in that context, we went down to look at the legislation and how to create a legal framework for energy poverty. And we had three different important steps that took place there. We set the Energy and Climate Governance Regulation back in 2018, and here introduced a requirement on the member states to assess energy poverty where it's at a significant level, and then develop measures to assess it. All this in their National and Energy Climate Plan, which is the plan to take Europe towards its climate targets under Paris Agreement. And the next important part was the Electricity Directive, the one I spoke about earlier. So we revised this back in 2018, 2019. And here we set up a sectoral framework, so electricity sector framework, where we sharpened the definitions of energy poverty and vulnerable consumers, and then also worked on the protection aspects. So really looking at how to deal with the immediate aid to the energy poor, social policy related disconnection, prohibitions, and that kind of things. And then on the other hand, we started already looking also into the root causes of the problem, and those are the structural measures. And that was done through a communication or a Commission recommendation on energy poverty, the point being to advise the member states on what to do. And that takes us a step further. So now we are getting into the Electricity directive a little bit more in detail. So what this directive did is it set up a framework on both energy poverty and vulnerable consumers. It defined certain immediate support measures, protection from disconnections and direct income support, and gave a lot of flexibility to the member states on how they do it in their specific context. And we also drilled into those famous root causes and trying to get to a situation where the support that member states are giving is really targeted to those who need it. So the energy poor, not to give, produce cheap electricity to warm up swimming pools of the wealthy, for instance. And this was the moment when we tried still to go deeper into the definition of the issue, but frankly, we did not get that far. And still under the European Green Deal, we're now moving from the Energy Union strategy to the European Green Deal strategy with the current Commission. So in comes a very important new policy area, which is the just transition. And the logic of just transition is to help regions whose economy revolves around fossil fuel extraction and related industries. So we help these regions to transform their economies towards more sustainable economies and businesses and that. And this meant supporting, for instance, carbon-intensive regions, dealing with coal, peat, and oil shale and that kind of things. And then in that context, focusing in particular on the needs of the vulnerable consumers and the energy poor. And at the same time, the Commission was developing the European Pillar of Social Rights, which started to connect the European social policy with the energy policy aspects and indeed the just transition context. And at that moment, we are coming to the moment when European Commission adopts in law the European climate law, the climate neutrality target by 2050. And that is a very ambitious target. So at the same time, we decided that we need to set up a sort of a midterm milestone in 2030. And this is what the so-called Fit for 55 package is all about. So it is about upgrading all sectoral energy, climate, forestry, etc. legislation to the ambition level that can take us confidently to climate neutrality by 2050. And on this honeycomb here, so you can see these different legislative proposals, which were then upgraded, much about transport, climate, energy, and so on. And some of them, like the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive or the Energy Efficiency Directive, are dealing directly with energy poverty aspects. This starts the period of mainstreaming energy poverty in legislation. And this package of Fit for 55, so it started with the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is still currently, while we are taping this, it's still in negotiations, close to ready. But the novelty, what is there, is that we are going towards finally defining the problem so that we can then seriously address it later on. At the same time, we are giving priority to the energy poor in getting support from the energy efficiency services and getting them priority. And the big new thing, which is coming here, is the Social Climate Fund, a new fund, actually the first such, which addresses really the causes of energy poverty specifically. It is a support mechanism which is set there as we ramp up the ambition of the energy transition. So things get more complex and there's a risk that people are left behind. So for that reason, we decided that we need a special support for that. And also because there will be the extension of the emission trading system towards the fuels in transport and in the building sector. So that is the second driver of this. And as I said, so now we are at the stage that we have actually a concrete text on the definition of energy poverty. On the table, it puts the focus on energy poor households being those who are lacking access to the essential energy services that they need to guarantee a decent standard of living and health. And this goes into issues such as warmth, cooling, lighting, and energy to power appliances. So to ensure also the sort of social connectivity. And all of this is, of course, very relevant to adjust to the national context. And when we then go further, so in this same directive on energy efficiency, we have some other provisions, which also are super important. There is the so-called energy savings obligation, where again, priority on savings is given to the energy poor. And there is also an energy efficiency obligation scheme that a member state may set. And here they oblige certain parties, like for instance, energy providers, to improve the energy savings, increase the energy savings among the vulnerable consumers, and usually people affected by energy poverty. And on top of that, there is the Energy Efficiency National Fund, which is a new proposal that we invite member states to set up in their specific context. So I mentioned to you already the Social Climate Fund. This is about reinforcing indeed the social dimension of the work we are doing. And on the proposal that we have put on the table, which is about to be adopted, so we created indeed a dedicated fund to which will serve low-income households and also micro-enterprises on energy and transport poverty issues as well. And this has been set for an initial period of 2026-2032, and it is connected to the emission trading system for the funds. And it intends to mobilize around 86.7 billion euros. The mainstreaming doesn't stop with the Social Climate Fund, actually. There is also another piece of important legislation, the so-called hydrogen and gas decarbonization package, which is under finalization. And this actually now adds to the previous setting where we had electricity legislation covering energy poverty and vulnerable consumers. So now we have upgraded the gas-related legislation to do the same. So we are really mirroring these consumer protection provisions in those two important areas. And another aspect, another piece of law which is coming here is the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is focusing indeed the energy performance of buildings, like the name says. And again here, focus on renovation of the most vulnerable. I will say a word about that later on. So then there is also a regulation, or a recommendation on fair transition, which is relevant in this respect. And again, the just transition aspect comes in here. So we all know that heating is a very large part of people's energy bills. So therefore, the current review of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive is at the center of the Fit for 55 package. And here we are actually developing on the definition of vulnerable consumers. We are introducing something called the vulnerable households, which narrows down the aspect indeed to households. And here we're looking at not only the ones that we are already at the stage of energy poverty, but also some of the middle income households who have, due to the current energy crisis, have been having difficulties to deal with their energy costs and bills. So this is a new aspect that has been taken into account here. And again, focus is on the worst performing building buildings in the European building stock, and development of minimum performance standards there, and this way getting to the causes of our energy poverty. And there are national renovation plans which are part of this package, so to say, and also provisions which are dealing with the financial support, and again prioritizing that to the energy poor and the vulnerable. Now, I mentioned the word heating, so that comes through, of course, the renovation part, but it also comes through clearly through the energy source that people use. And in many European countries, that is gas. And therefore, in that hydrogen and gas decarbonization package that I referred to earlier, so there are specific definitions related to vulnerable customers and the need for member states to ensure adequate safeguards to protect this group of people. And also make sure that this definition of the vulnerable is clear. It's not just left at a very generic level, but it is clear. And then there are also very concrete items in that legislation which reduce, for instance, or prevent the disconnections of gas deliveries in wintertime, which is of course very important for the households. Now, at this moment, a couple of words about the crises, and I speak in plural. We had first the COVID crisis, the pandemic, and very soon after that, we are faced now with the Russian attack against Ukraine, which has triggered a global energy crisis. So these two crises have, of course, shaken the whole energy system and the markets, caused inflation and all the rest. So the impact on the work that I have been describing so far is that we took a second look at what we were negotiating related to the topics on energy poverty and vulnerability, and we reinforced the various provisions. And first it was about the short-term direct support to consumers, and particularly the most vulnerable, and then also medium-term measures such as again addressing those root causes. We are coming back to the same thing, energy efficiency related issues. But then also we developed stronger cooperation with between the member states on these issues, setting up a coordination group. And all of this was to sort of soften the impact of the fast rising prices of energy in this context. And this was back in October 21. The response of the EU towards the Russian invasion and the ensuing crisis was the REPower EU action plan. And this was there to decouple Europe from Russian fossil fuel imports, but also at the same time then to boost the green transition, boost the energy transition at the same time, because that is the long-term solution for us. And in that context, we developed various short-term and mid-term measures that were earlier not possible, but today are. And this means giving, for instance, member states the possibility to regulate energy prices for consumers. And then also, of course, adding financing and also changing legislation to accelerate all the energy efficiency measures, as well as renewable energy related measures, which are there to reduce actually the price of energy, since renewable energy today is actually the cheapest form of energy. So in the REPower EU context, those changes that we introduced are now driven by this energy crisis, the rapidly rising prices of energy, and therefore the definition which is coming up in the Social Climate Fund which is talking about the vulnerable households. So here you find a specific reference both to the low and middle income households who are suffering from energy poverty. And there, the fact that this is not a normal situation, we're talking about the increasing price environment, and that is quite a special thing. And then the transport poverty is a novelty. This we had never really focused on specifically, but now it is brought in there. And we are talking here about the individual's lack of or inability or difficulty to afford the costs of private or public transport, for that matter. And that is the connection again to higher fuel prices, and then perhaps also partially related to any risk of the emission trading to affect the situation. Now I'm leaving the definitions and a couple of words on the size, really the impact of the social climate fund. So what's the money on the table? And what it can be used for? Well, there are basically two things. It can be used for direct income support to the needy, and there is a ceiling on that. It is 35.7% of the total, because of course we want to make sure that there is sufficient, and actually most of the money goes into dealing with the root causes of problems instead of like the short-term alleviation of payment difficulties and things like that. So that's why the 2/3 of the fund is aimed at the structural measures and investments, indeed, into be it energy efficiency, building renovation, or heating and cooling systems, and various things like that. And these can be then taken. These measures can be taken at different level, including down to community level. And there is various types of technical advice which is given here on that topic. Now, something we're looking ahead now. There are the national energy and climate plans, which exist. Those are being updated in the summer, autumn of 2023. And the plan is to do certain updates to their content and look at the multi-dimensionality of these plans, and particularly also the local context. So make sure that the member states, they use more than one indicator to assess energy poverty, because one is too little. It's too blunt, if we could say this way, as a way. So you need to use many to really capture the different aspects and different groups of people who fall into that. We are also expecting the member states to develop on their steps when it comes to availability of data, and make it available in a timely manner. So we want to help the member states in this important work. And then the third important issue here is objectives. So in addition to just sort of measuring how much you have, how big a problem the energy poverty is in a country, and then sort of starting to address it in some vague way. So now we invite the member states to actually set also clear objectives, because it's much better. You have a much higher likelihood of reaching results if you actually have a plan and you have an objective, and then you start working towards it. And therefore, there's an expectations that member states will be developing well-designed policies and measures in an integrated manner. And on that, they connect. This work connects to the Council recommendation on fair transition. Now I'm leaving back the legislation. I will say a few words on the other part of the European strategy to deal with energy poverty. So legislation is the top-down work, but we have also the bottom-up work, which is equally important, because if you want a law to be implemented, you will want to make sure that those who are implementing it, which are usually the local authorities, that they are well placed to do that. And it is a smart idea to listen to them and to help them actually already prepare for this, even on voluntary basis. And that's the logic that Commission has been applying for a long time already on all energy and climate related areas. So we have the combination of law and then indeed the enabling framework, where we have various types of voluntary initiatives. And I could mention here the Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which is let's say the doyen, the oldest of these initiatives. But there is also the Climate Neutral Cities Mission, where on both the focus is on, of course, climate neutrality, but there is also the aspect of energy poverty taken into account. Specifically on energy poverty, we set up back in 2018 an energy poverty observatory. And this was part of the goal to gain knowledge, collect together, develop data and share good practices between particularly the local authorities, but not only, also the central government of the member states, so that the awareness of the problem would be better and also the political measures would follow. So the Energy Poverty Observatory was launched indeed by the Commission, and it was working a lot on knowledge sharing, knowledge collection and studies. There was also some technical assistance here, and focus was particularly on creating better transparency to the problem and sharing all that knowledge which is found throughout Europe between the different stakeholders, and then indeed helping out the member states to get started with some of these policies. Now, I mentioned the connection to cities, and here I'm focusing now on the Covenant of Mayors with its 11,000 cities which are committed to indeed EU's climate and energy targets. And here work started together with the Energy Poverty Observatory to develop an action line, or we call it a pillar, where the cities which are part of the Covenant of Mayors, that they would start also working on the energy poverty problems of their citizens at the same time as they look at solutions in the area of mitigation and adaptation to climate change. So we ended up having a third element here, energy poverty, and this way acknowledging the work, the social needs and concerns that we had, and then the connections that are there between much of the work related to reducing emissions and then some of the solutions which can help also energy poor in that context. And from there on, indeed, we have now come to a situation that we have those three pillars that I mentioned, so mitigation, adaptation, and energy poverty. So the cities, those 10,000, 11,000 cities, they are now working towards that. And the energy poverty work is an important part of this. And here you see where the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub comes in. And Energy Poverty Advisory Hub is, of course, the successor of Energy Poverty Observatory. So an entity that takes the work one step higher and is working together with the cities, in this case, through case studies, guidance, and technical assistance and other means. And this way we are creating synergies between these initiatives that I have mentioned. And here are some more details on the work that is taking place in this context over energy poverty. Let's now then we are coming here to my final slide, and actually you will see there are mainly the connections, all the links towards more information on Energy Poverty Advisory Hub. I'm not going more into that because you will be hearing more about this in the other modules of this training. So I just thank you very much for your attention and wish you a very good day or evening wherever you are.